Hello, and welcome to Thinking Boldly. This is the podcast series for the Consilium Institute. I am retired Judge Julie Field, and I am here with my partner and colleague, Heidi Webb. And today we are very, very pleased to have as our guest Joe Woodman, who is a certified divorce lending professional and a proud Tapestry member. So, Joe, we're just very excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, let me tell everyone a little bit more about Joe. Joe is based out of Northern Colorado, where he grew up. He attended Colorado State University, go Rams, where he earned a degree in human development and family studies. After years of working in the nonprofit sector, both locally and abroad, Joe transitioned into mortgage lending, where he found his calling in divorce mortgage planning lending. As a certified divorce lending professional with the Divorce Lending Association, Joe specializes in supporting divorcing homeowners as they restructure their families and their lives. Joe is married with 3 school-age children, and his hobbies include home improvement and martial arts. So, Joe, I know we're going to want to talk with you more about many of those things, including the work that you did abroad. I'm very interested in, I know our listeners will be very interested in hearing about that as well, along with everything that you do in your work as a divorce mortgage lending professional. So thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely.
So let me just start with, what is a CDLP? What is the Certified Divorce Lending Professional?
So yeah, I know you guys had Jody on before, and I
Mm-hmm.
had a chance to
Jody
watch
Bruns.
that. Yeah, Jody Bruns. She started the Divorce Lending Association. I actually met her probably within my first week getting into mortgage lending, and we worked for the same company, and so we were kind of a little bit of a cohort, and she was predominantly working with people who were going through divorces, and a lot of this stuff would just come up, a lot of the complexities, and when as you're getting into any new career, everything's new, and so, but they're Jody made it very clear just that divorce was this special thing as it relates to mortgages, and so I thought that was interesting, but I was also kind of drinking from the fire hose at the time, and eventually uh, had my first divorcing client, and it's like, oh well, I'm just gonna do X, Y, and Z, and then Jody very graciously, no, you can't do that. It has to be treated this way. You have to do all of these other things and think about it a different way. And I believe at that time she was starting the Divorce Lending Association. She may have had some traction by then already, but so through that, and then over the years, just working with divorcing homeowners, and then I got the certification with Jody, did the training, and have kind of kept that going. So in addition to the training through the Divorce Lending Association Certified Divorce Lending Professional process, just gaining real world experience working with divorcing folks. Yeah.
Can you highlight for us some of the things that make it such a different territory and a different terrain?
Well, there's a lot to it. The parts that are most interesting to me are not necessarily about the mortgage piece, the complexities that just come from the human piece, because they're not something that you can really train for. There there's a lot that's I don't want to say it's intuitive. I mean, it's kind of a combination of intuition and experience. Like, how do you account for the chaos that's going on in a person's life? The thing I'll kind of regularly focus on. I try and use this to illustrate, without saying I understand what you're going through. Try and communicate, I understand that there's a level of challenge, or that there could be a level of challenge with some of this stuff. Like, I'll say, for the most part, I think it's pretty true that most of us are kind of barely getting by with our normal life, and that's assuming our health is okay and our finances are okay, and things with our kids' school is okay, and all that. We're kind of barely hanging on. And then the idea that you take somebody who's barely hanging on under normal circumstances and then throw in what is probably like a top two or three most disruptive things that you can experience, maybe second to like a health crisis kind of thing. It's just it's such a wild thing to walk through somebody with, and the emotional complexities, the things that you could say under normal circumstances that you can't say, the things that you have to say that you have to know how to say, the questions that you have to ask. Um, that's the parts that are different. Those are the most interesting parts to me that are different. Now, the most important part technically is just how divorce settlement agreements and the legal process attached to divorce gets filtered through or transferred or applies to the mortgage world. The mortgage guidelines, it's probably the best way to understand it, is there's almost like another legal code if you think about it that way. Like mortgage, like another thing I'll reference is there's a book of guidelines for just one loan program, like an FHA loan program. HUD, Housing and Urban Development, FHA. Most people know what that is. The book is roughly the size of the Bible, and it's filled with regulations and guidelines. So you're taking and then also, not to mention that your average attorney and courtroom doesn't necessarily consider or care all that much what's in that guidebook, for good reason and not good reason. Some is just bandwidth or a lack of priority. Some of it is just
they don't teach it in law school.
Yes, absolutely. But it's also just we've got 10,000 other things to worry about that feel more important and arguably are more important, at least in the moment. That if you can just sort of solve the real estate problem by something simple, by saying something simple like, in 6 months, the house is going to be refinanced to remove so-and-so's name. They're going to get an equity buyout for this amount of money. And if that can't be done, then the house needs to be sold. Now, that's very, very simple. It's clean and it's common sense. And you'd think, I think it's fair for the legal professionals and everybody else involved in the subjects themselves to say, okay, well, now that we've got that out of the way, let's deal with these other things that feel so much more important, like, custody and maybe even, child support, maintenance, all that kind of stuff. That all feels way more important, and I totally understand that. The problem is that once that is taken care of and you move into, okay, now we have to force this puzzle or this structure that is the divorce settlement through the FHA guidelines or through the Fannie Mae guidelines, or and you run into all sorts of problems like that. And some of it is, sometimes there are divorce settlements that kind of shoot themselves in the foot, and they just become complicated from a mortgage perspective. I'm sure from a legal perspective, somebody might say that as well, but from a mortgage perspective, but then there's also just the surprises that come down the road. You go through what could potentially be a traumatic legal process or mediation. Maybe there's a lot of contentious debate and argument and negotiation, and you come to a settlement that feels like it, whether it's good or not, it's working, it's holding together. And then you run into, hey, everything that you thought about about your life, where you're going to live, what your lifestyle is going to be like, where your kids are going to potentially go to school, what your housing is going to look like, payments going to look like, all of that now we have to revisit. And that's really, really not fun. And it's so difficult for the people who are going through that. There's a re-traumatizing, I think. And what I found in the divorce mortgage planning process is that if you do it in the right order and you do it well, not only are people prepared, but the sense is that even in some rough situations, what you get is a sense of empowerment and agency. Because even if you put together you uncover a difficult circumstance. Hey, I think I'm going to leave my husband, or uh, that's kind of a standard conversation. I'm thinking about leaving my husband, or I've been told that this is happening. Uh, what is what can I do as far as real estate goes? And sometimes the end of that conversation is, well, if you choose to go down that path, again, assuming in this hypothetical circumstance they're choosing it, oftentimes it's forced on them. But if you choose to go down this path, you are choosing a radical reconstruction of your life, where not just as far as the family goes, which you've already maybe accepted, but you're also going to have to live in a different community. Maybe you can no longer afford to live in the community that you want to live in. That may mean your kids change schools, all sorts of potentially disruptive and difficult things. But when you give the person that those options, and they feel educated and empowered, and it I feel like that energy transitions into more confidence in other areas of the divorce. Like, I'm not necessarily going to have any control over what happens with custody, but I know that because I've done the mental homework, I know that if I go down this road, I'm not going to live in my house anymore. I've made peace with that. It's not going to happen to me. It's a decision that I made, even though it's a tough decision. It's a decision that I made. And so that's really exciting and encouraging to me. I'm
Mhm.
shocked at how often these seemingly horrible situations end up being, I don't want to say good, but they have an optimistic outlook, or have
Mhm.
some feeling of hope about what's going to happen through the situation. And that doesn't always happen, but
Well, and I think to your credit, Joe, I think a lot of that comes from you, right? And I think your training and your degree in human development and family studies, I'm sure, helps influence how you approach the work that you're doing with people with this very important process of figuring out what's going to happen to the house after the divorce.
I remember you saying, Joe, in a former conversation we had a while ago about how people sometimes you have conversations with people months before this is really an issue in the separation agreement, maybe even before they've consulted with a lawyer about the divorce. And I think, for listeners, for people sort of thinking about it, to know that's an option. That's a really real important thing to do. And, your ability to sit with someone in that really difficult space in the way that you've described and help them sort of envision what this is that they're attempting to do, and that there's more than one road, and some have roadblocks and some have clear, a more clear path. So, but to understand, and as you've said, to give them agency over that decision. At least if I have that roadblock and I know that I have that roadblock and I choose to go down that way, I know what I'm confronting. And that's a really different way to enter any process. So, yeah, I think that's huge that you have that ability and that skill, and you call it intuitive, but you did say it comes with experience. And I think it's really, that's the sweet spot of a lot of things in life, right? It's like you have the knowledge and you have sort of the ability to sort of like fashion something from it that's maybe not quite as tangible. Not that knowledge is tangible, but not quite as, it's a little more ephemeral, I guess. But you can sort of bring it together in a way that makes someone feel more whole.
yeah, I mean, you mentioned, I mean, the experience and the education background. One of the things I joke about, my human development and family studies degree it's a great degree for grad school because it's really easy to get good grades. The challenge though is, I don't know if you'd call it like a deconstructive process, or at least my personal experience. And I haven't talked to other students or professors if this is a normal thing to experience, but through the process, they'll say, okay, here's a theory about why people are the way that they are. And you go, okay, like that makes sense. And then they go, okay, now, the next section, we're going to teach you about why all that was wrong. And here's another theory. And then you go, okay, well, that makes sense. And then another one. And then what I found is that by the end of it, you just go, I actually have no idea why people are the way that they are. And I don't think anybody else does. And and so you get, I guess it's good for going into therapy. And a lot of people do go into marriage and family therapy because you just, at the end, you go, I actually have no idea. Like I don't, so I'm just going to listen and all sorts of different lifestyles and decisions and ways of thinking come with uh, different outcomes. But it's super, super helpful for working with people who are going through divorce because they're at a particularly vulnerable place, maybe the most vulnerable place they've been in their adult lives, maybe their whole lives. And it's just, you also have to be really, I find that with divorce to go well, just generally, you have to be really, really patient about everything, but in particular, jumping to conclusions. Somebody says, this is the way that things are going to be. And you have to go, okay, well, maybe, maybe not. So I have to put that, I can't just ignore that. If somebody says, oh, this is what I want, and it has to be this way. Okay, well, you've said that. I don't know if that's going to change. Let's give that some time. And that coming from that educational background helps a lot
Yeah,
because so
that's
many, go ahead.
yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, it sounds just like the courses. It's sort of like maybe it's not about the knowledge, it's about like finding the space to be comfortable in the ambivalence, and when you say, this seemed right and this does too, and this does too, and they maybe all seem wrong too. But like, how do we get to a space where, I can live with it? I can help craft something that is better than what I have. Because in the end, I mean, isn't that why someone's going through this? It's like, why would we be trying to be divorced if we didn't think it would be an improvement, in someone's life? I mean, that would be sort of an odd way to proceed, right?
Yeah, and it's a strange thing to be experiencing from the inside when I'm looking at the financial devastation potentially that somebody will be facing and to think, boy, this must be a really bad situation because they're willing to accept this outcome, which just feels like such a big step backwards. And I it's not common for me it's not unheard of, but it's not common for me to be working with both partners.
Mhm.
And so there's always this sort of uh, degree of uncertainty because I don't know the other person. Haven't had the opportunity to connect with the person. And oftentimes, unsurprisingly, when people are framing uh, what they're experiencing, it's framed in a pretty negative, like the most negative interpretation of X, Y, and Z. It's not always the case. I have an exception actually that I'm working with right now where I don't think she said one negative thing about her partner, which is, I'm always like, is she just very professional? Or is it truly that, is it truly a cooperative?
Mhm.
I mean, obviously those happen too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
no, definitely. I remember, I guess I'll never forget when somebody said to me once after I had, crunched out a lot of numbers in terms of maintenance and child support and what sort of an after picture was going to look, and it wasn't pretty. And she looked at me and she said, I don't care if I'm destitute. I'm doing this.
Mhm.
And it was just that moment of like, there's nothing you could tell me right now about finances that would make me change my mind. It's like, that's so long as you know, it's like, and still, you're making that choice. I mean, this is still a better choice. You will, craft something, from whole cloth and you'll start this over because you don't want to stay where you are. And that's for some people the best option.
Yeah, and I have to remind myself again in some of these really difficult situations that I'm sure there's an exception, but I'm pretty sure almost everybody I know who's been through a divorce uh, either has said that they would consider their life better, some kind of an improvement. Like,
Yeah.
okay, like whether it's a new relationship or more independence or whatever. I don't think I've met. I bet if I really thought about it, I could probably think of an example. But I don't think I've met anybody who just said, "No, it was an absolute disaster. Life is worse now. I wish I could go back."
Mhm.
Um, so I have to. I'm like, okay, well, you'll probably feel like your life has improved at some point.
Right. It may not be immediate,
Sometimes
but it
enough
might
time.
be.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. Sometimes time has to go by. Like, you have to reframe
right.
we figure it, and it doesn't all happen at once. And there are moments, certainly, when you have that low point and it's like, why did I do this? Like, how bad was it? Or it's a revisionist memory of just like, maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, and you start sort of like reconstructing, and I mean, that happens. And I think people do have regrets along the way sometimes, but I think that, that's why it's important to gather information and sit with it and think it through and, have the opportunity to engage in therapy around issues that maybe, we were just about your own growth, about your partner's growth, about the relationship, all these things are, nothing stays still in the world. So it's,
and just as through sort of the last few minutes of what we've been talking about, some of the, I know just, to share to some of what the value that I find in Concilium and the Tapestry, because what I do touches on so many areas of people's lives, I end up having to give a lot of homework. Some of it is real simple, like, I mean, it's not necessarily easy, but real simple. Realistically, what do you think you can afford through this transition? Okay, so sometimes they have to go and figure out what are my expenses and all that, and that's fairly straightforward. But oftentimes it's, I need you to talk to somebody about how important this is. Okay, you really, really want to hang on to the house. I need you to really figure out how important that is, because there are major financial consequences to doing that, for example. And being able to have, and I maybe, for better or worse, will try to explore that a little bit. I'd probably be better off to just not have the conversation, just be able to say, hey, this is a really important conversation. This is something you need to talk about with your therapist or your trusted friend or whatever. Ideally, those kinds of things happen with therapists, in my opinion, because trusted friend usually has a very strong opinion about something that may or may not be impartial. And being able to say, these are the things that you need to figure out before we even really talk about the financial piece. I can tell you what can be done. I can't tell you what should be done. And that's something that, honestly, most people who are in the middle of a divorce, I don't think, if they were honest with themselves, are really all that qualified to assign a should to something, or at least certain areas, without some sort of support to help, because your mind is so absorbed in what you're going through in the moment. And obviously you're making decisions that have 30-year lifelong implications through a lens that's hyper intense for that 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. So being able, mental health professionals, obviously the attorney piece, even when attorneys aren't involved, it's often like, these are legal questions you really need to maybe discuss with an attorney. And then, tax things. So being able to have a number of people that especially when they are, in the Tapestry and Concilium as well, because I know that they're not going to be surprised when I give them that homework or when I reach out. And that helps me tremendously, that team approach.
I'm so glad to hear that, because I think, our vision certainly with the Tapestry is exactly that, that you shouldn't feel ever like, when you're calling someone in the Tapestry, that they wouldn't accept your call and want to work with you. And I think for people who are, going through this, to know that they, it's sort of like you hire one, but you get a whole lot more. You get all these other people sort of in your, advisory, who are there to assist you along the way. And that's, a huge added value. So, yeah.
What advice would you give to your colleagues in the Tapestry who are mental health professionals or attorneys about you and your role, and how they can work with you as part of this council of wise advisors for a particular client?
Yeah, I just don't think you can overestimate the the importance of the mortgage, the real estate, the equity conversation very, very early in the process. And not necessarily, there's sort of a, hey, you just need to do that to avoid problems approach. And that's totally right. But also the, because it's such an emotional conversation, but also so practical and I mean, systematized, it's constrained, it's a wonderful, it's just a good it's something that can be leveraged for progress in other areas. Like let's figure out what's really driving where this person's at financially, uh emotionally, psychologically, as far as what's important with the kids. The conversation around real estate is, yes, it's a conversation about assets, but it really is not a conversation about assets. When it comes to real estate, unless it's a rental property, very rarely is a person's primary residence an asset to them. It's something so much bigger than that, so much more important. So you can things will be unearthed in the conversation, and I'll have moments where I'm able to say, and I love to be able to do this, to be able to communicate to an attorney. It seems to me like these are the things that are really, really important. This is what they're really, really worried about,
Love
like
that.
those kinds of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. I think for a lot of people, I would think that, you know, what you do as a lender is not something people encounter on an everyday basis if they're not in the business. So, it's if they bought their house 15 years ago or 20 years ago and they had an interaction with a lender, they may well not be in a relationship with that person. And they may not know, even because it was so integrated into the real estate purchase, that it was how important it was in terms of restructuring their family and, how that would play out. Because it's sort of one of those like silent, silent pieces as far as a consumer's concerned of the residential, real estate transaction process. Like it has to happen for most people, but once it happens, it just sort of like goes silent.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, when I bought my first house, that was my experience. You just sort of forget about it, and I don't get frustrated when somebody's like, "Well, why would this be important?" So I'm like, "Well, yeah, that makes sense," but because it is unseen, but it is, if you own a home, you've been forced through this process, and you may not have experienced it as much of a process because the consumer is largely shielded from that process unless something goes wrong. I mean, if you have a friend who's experienced a negative lending,
Right.
then all of a sudden the reality of it uh, comes. Yeah, well, why am I gonna uh, lose my earnest money because this house got and oh well, people want yeah, then they realize, oh well, we're trying to force a square through a what is it, a square peg through a round hole, and it's well, why is the hole round and why is mine square? Like, you don't want to have this conversation, I promise you.
Right. Right. No,
Right.
100%. Joe, I am curious how you got into doing what you're doing, like, and your background before it. So if you can just take us through it a little bit, because I'm sure it's a really interesting journey.
Yeah, I mean, people in the mortgage business would probably, it's pretty common to say that you're forced into it or you fall into it. It's certainly not something like if a middle schooler were to say I'm going to be a lender, it'd be like, you should just be a pro football player or whatever. Like pick that.
Right.
It's uh it's not something that's easy to get into. It's not the kind of industry where you'd see a lot of like job openings, that kind of thing. You don't have to have a college degree to do it. Um, I was making very little money in the nonprofit world, and I was taking some grad coursework at online at the University of Denver, and with the sort of naive millennial ideal that, oh well, I'll just go get a graduate degree and then dot 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 make more money. Like that was kind of my my thought process. And so I was taking a graduate coursework. I had a bunch of student loans before that. I'd add another 20 grand in student loans. And then I was taking a finance course. And I mean, this is my late 20s, mid to late 20s, and I am doing like future value of money calculations on Excel spreadsheets. And I'm starting to go, boy, this compound interest thing is really, really odd. And then I'm calculating, all right, well, so if you want a Snickers bar today because you're at the you're at the gas station, like I'm hungry, okay, I'm gonna go buy it, whatever, it costs $1. Now it's like $3, or I don't know what this back then it was about $1. And and then you're like, wow, that's a lot of retirement money that you're spending on that half thought through snack. And then I started to think about the inverse of that with debt. And then I got really freaked out and realized that I put myself in a pretty bad financial position. I didn't grow up with much financial education. My family, uh, like a lot of probably middle class Americans, is just you just kind of get by. You borrow whatever's necessary for school, for example, because that's just a guaranteed investment. And what I started to realize is, okay, I'm going to get a graduate degree. My income, even with a graduate degree, is going to be too low to justify even the money that I'm borrowing to do this. So not only do I need to stop this graduate coursework, I actually need to re-examine career options. And so a lot of the nonprofit work that I'd done, it kind of prepares you for everything, but qualifies you for nothing. um, so, so my sister is a real estate agent, and she'd been trying to get me to be a real estate agent forever. And I was like, that sounds like the worst. I'm not going to do that. Like, why would anybody want to do that? And then she was like, eventually she shifted her tactic and was like, you should be a lender. And I was also like, why would anybody want to do that? I don't even know what that is. I owned a house, but I didn't know what a lender was. I mean, I remembered the lender, but like you said, you just don't think about it. I'd
Right.
send an email and say, hey, can I do this? And they'd say yes or no. Um, so I got in. Eventually, my sister just CC'd me on an email with some people and was like, hey, my brother's thinking about getting into business. And by then, I'd gotten desperate enough through trying to find other career positions. Um, like I Julie, you'll probably know. I mean, OtterBox, they kind of famously had this entry level where you work for like a contract position and you kind of work your way up. So I was looking into that as kind of my best option at the time, but the financial constraints were just too dire to do kind of an entry level work your way up kind of thing. And in the mortgage business, you kind of control your own destiny. So you either you and you control, am I going to be fabulously successful or am I going to be a train wreck? So I kind of was in a position where I had to take that kind of a risk. And it's a weird business. It does actually doesn't suit my personality all that well. I mean, there's certain aspects that do. The
Hmm.
divorce mortgage planning feel is when I feel the most at home, I suppose. That's where I feel like I'm actually doing what I'm good at, what I like to do. I have something unique to offer, as
Right.
opposed to kind of the
That
general mortgage business.
counseling sort of
Yeah.
piece. Yeah.
Yeah, connecting with people. It's not trans. I mean, the mortgage business is very transactional. It can be, yeah. And that just I hate that. I don't like that at all. But the divorce process is just it is not transactional. I mean, you're working with these people for a long time.
No, unless you treat it as transactional, which unfortunately some people do.
Sure.
Uh, any people do. But yeah, I mean, to have you, it's even more, I think, important to have you sort of involved in a transaction who brings humanity to it than, a situation where it's sort of like, yeah, you're getting divorced, but what we have to focus on is just the numbers and getting you through the process. It's sort of
Mhm.
like that feels devoid of any compassion.
So is the majority of your work with divorcing clients at this point, or is it a mix?
It's a mix. My preference, and I'm the way I have my team structured is I have a team and a business partner and assistant, and is set up so that we can continue to grow. Ideally, I mean, if I could push a button and have my ideal work circumstance, I would probably only do divorce mortgage planning, and then also reverse like Peckham because it's similar. It's actually there's a lot of commonality.
Mhm.
Usually, it's I mean, there's definitely a restructuring. I mean, a huge restructuring when people are at that phase of life. Oftentimes, they need solutions that aren't really about mortgages. Um, so, and you have more of a you have a different kind of relationship with the client in both of those circumstances. Or like you mentioned, you should. You don't necessarily have to, but you should. So yeah, I'd say that part, the divorce mortgage planning, has continued to grow. I would like to continue to grow it. Not that I don't like doing purchases, and your general stuff. I tend to only really want to do that if it's a less transactional kind of thing. Like if somebody calls me and says, like, hey, I need an interest rate or whatever I'm closing. Generally, I'll say, awesome, like work with my business partner, and then I'll make that connection, and I might still manage the relationship to a certain extent. Like outside of the transaction, I might call and check in and see how they're doing. But and then also just train wreck situations, complicated situations, like I tend to still get really engaged there where whether it's like a multi-generational, that's one that comes up, is multi-generational kind of purchasing situations where it's very, very complicated finances, or there's just a level of complexity where I start to feel like I care more. I don't know. I know that's not the right way to say it.
You probably feel a little bit more inspired, engaged.
Yes.
I mean, just
Yes.
I feel like you need that energy. It's like,
yeah, you need that people connection and you need that intellectual challenge too. I think it's the combination.
Yeah, 100%. What
Yeah.
states are you licensed in? I just want to ask.
So Colorado, Wyoming, Michigan, Florida, Arizona. My business partner is licensed in Texas and in Montana. It's not that hard to add states. I'd like to look, especially with the divorce mortgage piece, because it's so different. I will probably continue to add states as it makes sense to do so.
Great. That makes
Yeah. So I did want to ask you about your international nonprofit work and where you were and what you were doing, because I think that is an interesting dimension to your background.
Yeah, I lived in Nicaragua for about 15 months. There was a children's home down there. It was a nonprofit that runs a children's home there in the Philippines. And it was sort of it was just kind of a weird role. Like part of a lot of what I did was work with short-term volunteer groups that would come through kind of as a liaison. But I also sort of functioned as pseudo staff to the children's home. Like I lived in the teen boys' house, which was interesting because they had little homes. So and a lot's changed because this was, what are we, 2025? This was 13, 14 years ago. At that time, they had, one house with kids who I believe were under 10.
Oh, wow.
Then they had another.
Lost their parents, or what was the circumstance?
So the system is changing in Nicaragua, but they had been, or they're trying to move, or they've been trying for a long time to move towards a kind of kinship foster model like we have here. But they still rely pretty heavily on government and nonprofit run orphanages, for lack of a better word. It's kind of a misnomer to call them orphanages because very few of them were true orphans. Most of them were reported by their community members and the parents were kind of like DHS basically. And then they were placed in the home. They're all long-term placements though. So it wasn't, at least our facility was not one where somebody would come in for a few months until their family. It was a lot of the children of prostitutes, a lot. And
oh gosh.
And so oftentimes it was siblings. You'd get 3 or 4 or 5 that were all related, and then cousins. And I've worked kind of adjacent to DHS here in the States. I've seen how our system works here. We take it for granted. In fact, it's crazy how well the kinship system works. And obviously, it's got a ton of problems, but compared to what I've seen, down there, the odds of one person being incapable of taking care of their children, the odds of their sibling or their cousin or their mother being able to is pretty low. So generally, the poverty is so extreme there. So that was There were maybe one or two true orphans, but for the most part, they had parents who just were not capable of taking care of them for, lifestyle addiction, those kinds of things.
Wow. You said they would live in this home for years. It sounds like really lose contact with their biological family.
Most of the time, I don't think most of them completely lost contact. Sometimes people would come to visit. Uh, some circumstances wouldn't allow for that, but it wasn't uncommon for somebody's mom to come and see them every once in a while, or certainly like grandmother, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Wow, what an eye-opening experience, I'm sure, at that age for you, to
Yeah.
go and, experience something so profoundly different from, I'm sure, what you'd ever seen before.
Yeah, I mean, it was life changing. I mean, and then there's the cross cultural piece. I mean, also working with people in poverty. That's one thing. I don't. I mean, just to be honest, working with people in poverty is really, really hard. And
Yeah.
so in the mortgage business, working in the nonprofit world, I did a lot of stuff, similar things to what I kind of focus on in the mortgage world, but it's so much easier to just make progress when you've got like a divorce case or they're generally moving forward. They generally have means to move forward in their life, where in the cycles of poverty, it can wear you out. I mean,
Awesome.
and there are,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, there are saints among us who do that for a career their whole life, and somebody has to. And it just sort of boggles my mind every time I find somebody who can sustainably do it, because it just wore me out so fast. I mean, just a number of years you get burnt out. And then some people, 20, 30 years of giving their life to that, and yeah, better than me in a lot of ways.
Yeah, no, I think
Well, yes and no. Yeah, I mean, I think what this shows is the level of heart and compassion that you bring to the space that you work in. And I'm sure that your clients, your divorcing clients, and the people that you connect with in the Tapestry see that.
Thank you. I hope so. And I mean, yeah, I hope that, especially for those clients, I think they're maybe expecting a transactional conversation, and then I think after it, they're like, okay, like I actually feel like I have somebody on my team.
they got so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
amazing, really.
Yeah.
Sort of an unexpected gift for a lot of people, I'm sure, when they
Right.
encounter working with you. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you've really talked a lot, Joe, today about sort of the journey that you've taken yourself in terms of your life and, sort of thinking about going to graduate school and therapy and really getting sort of grounded in thinking about how people think and where they come from. It was interesting because you had talked about with us a little bit ago, the life-changing book that you read was Crime and Punishment. So tell us about that and how that sort of built into who you are today and why it was life-changing for you.
Yeah. So I, like a lot of people, um, I don't know how common it is, but I was in high school in 2000 to 2005, and uh, somehow caught like a bad nihilistic cynical bug, um, that a lot of teenagers, especially I think teenage males, catch that for a variety of reasons. I didn't have a real strong reason not to, I suppose, now that I look back. Some people have some anchors that can kind of withstand some of that influence. Um, and then, I had a series of experiences that uh, changed. They changed me, but it wasn't really supported from like an intellectual framework, or like it wasn't very explicit or thought out, or fleshed out. And then I can't even remember why I read I think I looked up like the 100 books that every man should read or something like that. And I
Yeah.
think it was on there. And I actually read it when I was living in Nicaragua. So I'm immersed in Spanish. I don't get to speak a lot of English. Um, and there's not a lot of, I think they had just gotten internet when I was there. So you did have internet access, but no smartphones. I had a cell phone that I could text people. You like pay per text kind of thing. So the books that I read during that phase of life had a particularly deep impact on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was the first time I read a book, and while I was reading it, I was realizing that the way that I think was changing. That was a strange experience. As I'm reading it, going, my personality, I think, is changing while I'm reading
Wow.
this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then for weeks after, you're just sitting and thinking about it. And the Raskolnikov character just so perfectly encapsulates a certain type of person that is very common. And I mean, there's a pride and an arrogance and a sadness and then pain. I mean, there's this whole mix of things, and so watching that actually play out. I mean, he's just a genius. Dostoevsky. Um, yeah, it kind of raised my expectation for what a book could be, I suppose.
Have you ever found anything that matches that expectation since? Any other books?
I don't know that I'll ever be impacted as much as that book, just because the time
Yeah.
of my life. I could see there are a number. There's a few books that I've read since then where I'm like, man, if I had really read this and gotten it when I was 23 or 25, maybe it could have had that impact. Or I mean, this isn't a good game to play, but had I had my head on straight enough to read a book when I was a teenager.
Well, that would have
Right.
been a big lift to read
Yes.
it. Right.
Well,
Read it now.
the funny part is I was forced to read a lot of these books that when I was in high school, but I didn't get it. I just was not mature enough. But then coming back and going through like the high school literature reading list and being like, boy, they really put some gems in there. Like,
Right.
Did you ever read The Master and Margarita?
I have. It's been a long time.
Making me think it might resonate, but yeah.
When did I read that? It was at least 10 years ago. I need to read it again. Honestly, I don't think I really got it. I'd be curious to read it now.
I listened to it not that long ago, so I'm a fan of sometimes listening to a book, or if I'm listening to a book and I'm not getting it, then I read it. If I'm reading it, I'm not getting it, I sometimes listen to it.
I might have listened to it as well, now that I think about it. I can't quite remember.
I think I ended up doing both, but you're really making me want to read Crime and Punishment again, because it's been about 35 years since I read it, probably. At
Yeah,
least.
same.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, and thank you for sharing the gift that you bring to your clients, and how valuable and unique that is, right? I mean, people who are going through divorce, dealing with what is the biggest financial asset in most marriages and probably the biggest emotional asset in both marriages and in their marriage really, really need someone like you who comes at it not just with head, but with heart. So thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for being a member of the Tapestry. And we're just so excited to have you with us and to see where you go next with this great adventure that you call life. So thank you for letting us be part of yours.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for asking such great questions. Anytime I get an opportunity to talk about books, especially.
It was a delightful conversation,
Yeah.
and those are the best when they just sort of like meander and I don't know, minds sort of meld. So it was
Sure.
delightful. Thank you
Thank
so
thank you very much.
much. Yeah.